talk. Driver in his bottles, the anticipated cop. Our vulnerability is no more insensitivity.
Hello everyone, welcome to A Mutant Manifesto, episode 25. I'm here with Jackie. Hello. Always great to chat to you. Today we wanted to focus on DC with Trump, and I'll try to, give a brief overview of kind of, what's been going on here and how people are feeling, especially with all the changes, or like what are the most, the most immediate changes that we feel within the short few weeks that he's been in office. So to give you context on the inauguration, DC was shut down and they put up those sort of like military grade barricades, right? As the inauguration was going on. There were signs that people, organizers had weed pasted all throughout downtown that said like racists out of DC and like transphobes out of DC, that in the aftermath of that had been like torn by people. And it's just very weird to be walking around downtown at that time. And also, mind you, a lot of people who live in DC fled the city to like kind of make way for, Trump supporters who are taking up Airbnbs, et cetera, and like just being in spaces. One thing that's really cool, though, of the people that remained, I got an account about someone, like two people who came into a bar with MAGA hats, and it was like a queer bar, I think. And they were like booed out of that bar by everybody who was there, which was great. That's a lovely moment. But again, like DC is a protean city in that way, in the sense that you can feel a palpable shift as an influx of conservatives come in whatever capacity, even if it's just for a convention or what have you, especially nowadays in the protest culture that we have, and that I guess police are afraid of. So while DC remains liberal in a very true and sort of like in both sides, the negative and positives of that word, with polls, of course, of activists in between, it does really change to be more conservative leaning when you've got a new administration that favors that. And so but with Trump this time, a lot of people are getting fired, and a lot of people who work in DC who may not be necessarily on the Hill proper, as in their roles have them on the Hill, like they're sort of in specific positions working for Congress. These are contractors, and like contractors who were working at the EPA, for example, who just lose their jobs immediately. Contractors who are associated with DEI initiatives like lose their jobs completely. And then with more of these EOs, you have like NGO people needing to change the names of their departments and programs, especially if they get federal funding, to not have DEI or DEIA in them. You have people at the NIH, for example, losing the ability to collaborate with other institutions. You have people working on environmental policy who, even though they don't directly work for the government and like maybe serve as a more advisory role to the government, knowing that none of their work is going to actually push through or go anywhere really puts even the whole organization in a precarious moment where they're like, wow, literally everything that we're going to be working on is going to be fruitless. And how then do you convince funders to fund your work if it's not producing anything out of that? And maybe one of the last couple of things I'll mention, one, there's the really kind of, there was a buzz around the USDA Inspector General, Phyllis Fung, being ousted, right? She worked at the organization for 22 years and refused to accept that Trump had fired her. And so she was escorted out. And maybe one of the bigger things that impacted a lot of people who are either set to come to DC or who currently work in DC or are lawyers in DC, because of the federal hiring freeze. A lot of their offers for their 1L and 2L summers were rescinded. The DOJ is kind of being gutted to some extent. There's a question about how the judicial branch is going to support up and coming lawyers who believe in the rule of law, as Carmela had put it. There's a lot of sort of internal dynamics related to that as well. But yeah, DC's a really weird place now. A lot of my friends are looking for work and kind of desperately trying to recalibrate their lives because by working in building careers in a line of work that is directly opposing Project 2025, people got screwed. So I'll stop there. Thank you for listening to me rant, listeners and Jackie. So any of those things of interest, tasty morsels.
I mean, it's not a rant at all. To be honest, I haven't really been following the many daily updates of this campaign so far. I basically dip my head in every couple days, maybe a couple times a week, and then learn a bunch of stuff, and then the next day I learned that it's been reversed or something different happened or something else took its place or whatever. I mean, of course, I felt the ripples of these things working for public schools because I mean, there's a lot of questions about who's going to get deported and who's not, and what our district's policy is and can be regarding ICE raids and stuff. And then also, there is a question of funding for special ed programs, funding for, Minneapolis Public Schools in their mission statement has anti-racism as part of its mission statement. So will we just have to take that out of it? Or, I mean, of course, there's also these all come down to constitutional questions. So it remains to be seen whether the Supreme Court is that bot or not,
Right.
But these are serious questions that we're all kind of wondering about throughout the country in any kind of public sector, because essentially it is pretty fitting that the episode that just came out today, we're recording on February 2nd. Our other episode that just came out today was about the LA fires and this idea of privatization of all these different publicly funded services. And so the question really becomes for me, to what extent is it simply an attempt to gut as many public or public related jobs as possible and and basically set them up for private interests? And to what extent is this genuinely about, on the other hand, trying to fight what is perceived as a overreach in departments of DEI, etc.?
Yeah, I really do struggle with that question, because there's shit so with ending birthright citizenship, right? This being straight up unconstitutional. Some of those things feel like distractions. He really can't mobilize on that as quickly as the headline comes out. And still, it's a very real threat and problem, especially with the Supreme Court laid out like it is. And so when we talk about sort of raising the land for private interests, there does seem to be this very real fear. When we mentioned in the other episode, people are going to need to get money from somewhere, and no money, especially when it's coming from a political angle, it is completely freely given. There are always strings attached. NGOs are also especially if you're an NGO that's working on sort of for the good of people, etc. funders themselves are like, we're only going to fund specific projects that we believe in certain circumstances. So that like, here's a grant, but we want you to work on this specific thing. And the private entities, right, that these funders, yes, the entities themselves, right, the funders themselves are actually in control over what we say and how we do our jobs in many ways. And so I don't know what awful thing looms in the horizon so much as I can already see the way in which we engage with this and the way in which we talk about this is going to be fundamentally shifted, you know?
So here's some more questions. Like in DC, who is losing their jobs as a direct result of these executive orders?
So I think a good example for the way that the witch hunt work is like any of the DOJ lawyers that prosecute or DOJ prosecutors on the January 6th trial, all of them lost their jobs, right?
Because they were directly employed by the White House, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You also have to take into account like in the EO that talks about like DEI and eliminating DEI on quote unquote specious claims of inclusion, as they say. In that executive order, they literally like any contractors, any programs or any initiatives that are related to this. So of course we're sending a lot of Biden EOs. They're even taking down all documents related to, say, like trans or intersex health and help, right? In schools, whatever, like all those guidelines, they're doing away with all of them. And that means that people who were contracted by the US government at that time and maybe still had lasting contracts, they lose those contracts. On top of that, they compile a list of these people so that they won't be potentially hired again, at least for the next 4 years, to do any sort of related work, even if they've worked as a contractor throughout administrations. So if they ended up being a government contractor on something that's explicitly labeled environmental justice, this is in the DEI and DEIA EO, that person would be put on a list and therefore not hired for any other thing, right? And this is connected to the witch hunt of like, hey, you should snitch on your employees for doing DEI stuff. But when it comes to outside of the US, like the White House and maybe the US government roles, people are losing their jobs because their work is like becoming obsolete, right? So someone who has been working on a project that is like all green energy, etc., right? And they tried to get it through to Congress. Then at the NGO, they're like, well, now that environmental justice is nothing we can do on the Hill, that department either might be gutted or that person working on that project might be asked to like either leave their job and look for another thing or do something else completely. So sometimes it's not always losing your role, but it's also losing your work and your work stream and needing to pivot to something completely different in order to remain either in the city, in the organization, etc. And there could be examples that I'm missing here as well. So, yeah.
I mean, that's like really interesting. I mean, like, because there's like there's a whole like local economy that's set up based on people who are working with relationships to the White House. It's in DC then.
Yeah.
You know, it does kind of feel like it's like the fires that we talked about in LA, these natural disasters, quote unquote natural, like are and the responses to them. It's like that's kind of happening now through the administration. Like, I mean, like, you know, the multiple plane crashes collisions, the mid-air plane collisions, are like examples of like these different ramifications of this like many things at once sort of like blitzkrieg of just like doing all this different stuff at the same time, and it's clearly reckless and also has all sorts of like ripples economically. Now, like, I guess my question is like, essentially, if we basically said that like towards the end of our last episode about the LA fires, that like maybe one glimmer of hope is that we, you know, we see like who is our friend and who is not, and we see that like, okay, insurance companies not a friend,
right?
Anyone like but then like people are forced into different predatory contracts as a result of this disaster, and so hopefully people can like find solidarity about like, okay, like these big corporate interests not our friend, people who help us out because they're our neighbors, those are our friends, right?
Right.
Like police officers who are barring us from like getting our family heirlooms or whatever, not our friends, et cetera, et cetera. So like my question is like, is there, and like I hope I don't sound like, I mean, I am ignorant about like the inner workings of DC, but I guess my question is like, is there a sense of like this becoming a solidarity awakening element in like people who had previously worked these sort of like potentially somewhat like is I know that this is going to have deep ramifications for like whether people can continuously work on initiatives like diversity, equity, inclusion, and green energy, and all sorts of other like public goods, and causes. But like, is there an element of this that is kind of like forcing people face to face with the reality? It's solidarity causing in making them dispossessed, if that makes sense. Like, okay, so this class of people who's able to be this kind of like NGO workers, these orbiters of like White House initiatives. Is there an element of this that can potentially essentially like radicalize those people, or is that kind of besides the point to begin with? Is that a clear question? I guess another element of it is like, how much are these NGOs and things effective to begin with when you're trying to pressure the White House, which we've seen for the past like decade, I mean plus, has been like pretty much not open to most progressive policies to begin with.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta, I think there's I'll start with that last bit and then move towards like how people can maneuver in this city. I think you have to think about, I guess, Congress in some ways in two different buckets. There's the bucket of Congress members who want to say the most strategic progressive things all together and making a legacy over like larger swaths of things, and just being like the most progressive as they can be in order and also responsive to their constituents. And then there's a bucket of people who are like, I am my claim to this office is through this single issue, and I only want to hear and talk about and do things that are related to this because this is what my constituents are interested in. And so NGOs are effective at getting information to those offices and kind of just like crossing their fingers and seeing where that lands. Here's an example, like DC statehood and like the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So DC statehood was like wrapped into HR 1. In 2020, there were conversations around like whether or not we should ask for the moon, knowing that it's not going to go through, or if we should like water it down ourselves in the hopes that it looks like we've made these asks in good faith and we're going to get, a favorable response on maybe, if not 50%, 40% of what we put into this thing. Of course, DC statehood gets kicked out. It gets kind of warped. Even the Voting Rights Act and asks are watered down. You send it to the other side. The other side adds a whole bunch of bullshit that you have to try to catch and then send it back in. And so that infrastructure and that relationship, it's not like we're actively it's not like NGOs have been the movers and shakers, but they're the ones who are sort of like the ghost writers, and the main artists, I guess, are the people in Congress. And so when it comes to losing those jobs, I don't think a whole lot of them, if someone at an NGO lost their job, they could quickly pivot to a different position, which sort of gets into maybe the more like broader hiring situation. In DC, the shadiest people who may be like claiming to be liberal would be shamelessly like working. These are the people who were like, there's no Warren Bossing say working for the Biden administration. Like they may have lost their jobs, but they are more than ready to like work with quote unquote good conservatives. They're more than ready to be like taking on contractor roles in this new administration and keeping themselves afloat because they'll follow the money and the prestige wherever it goes. These are people who probably think of themselves as, I guess, pre 2016 Lindsey Grahams, right? They want to be the reach across the aisle Democrats, like, and I don't like them, but they are going to be fined, and probably don't feel too bad about maybe contracting work to enter evil entity or consultant firm here, right? There, in terms of radicalizing people, I think the people that are maybe a rung below that, who were maybe like on the neolib side of things, but like are starting to like lean into more progressive means of activism. Those people are they're like going to NGOs in droves, if that makes sense. Like they're the people who are looking to try and like reaffirm their values by saying, you know what, not working in the government is like, you know, a blessing in disguise. I'm going to actually do my passion, which is to like find an environmental NGO that's going to hire me and let me say what I want to say about what we need to do in the environment. So to answer your question shortly and very briefly, it is not radicalizing. Like, and that's a problem I with DC. The radical people in the city typically aren't hired onto those government roles is basically the point that I'm trying to make. Like DC is a city of like type A class presidents and rule followers if you're going into the government. And outside of that, there are a bunch of people who are really scrappy, who are working at these NGOs and saying the good things and trying to fight the good fight in all the ways that they can, right? Like DC's council members are like, there's a lot of them on the Green Party, for example, but then you've got Phil Mendelson and his Democrat evil ass just like pushing through things that give private entities rights over a lot of the housing in the city, right? Like that sort of bullshit, right? So yeah, it doesn't pay to be particularly progressive in DC, because if you put a target on your back, then no one's going to want to associate with you because it could put their job in jeopardy, is my assumption and my assertion based on how I've seen a lot of people move. Like they'll go to the protest and things, but they may not necessarily be willing to put themselves at risk for because you know, you could go to jail for a very long time if you touch or damage the wrong thing in this city. And I'll stop there. That was a bit of a rant, so I hope I answered your question.
No, yeah, I mean, so like, is it at all appropriate to have a kind of a perspective from the left where you're like, okay, well, these are two of my enemies and one of them is like butchering the other one, and like, you know, or I mean, because like these things, like I said, like even with MPS, like Minneapolis Public Schools,
yeah,
again, like there is a risk of this rippling down and basically defunding the entire school system.
Yeah,
I mean, you know, like or like forcing us to like take any kind of race race related class like off the curriculum. So that's like a very direct effect. But like when it comes to the people that are actually getting fired because of these things, well, I guess it is pretty much just consolidation of like like race solidarity in a way, or like white identitarianism. But
yeah, let me give you an example, and let me see if I'm hearing you correctly. Are you asking if by like staying true to your values, right, by including some of this language or even persisting and teaching these courses, you run the risk of like losing everything, and then by falling and going to ground zero, maybe you have an opportunity to like do a different type of public school, right? Or like set up a different system? Is that what you're asking?
I mean, yeah, I guess it's kind of like, okay, like, is this just like us coming to terms with like, is this a moment where like we just kind of have to face that like the whole kind of like system of electoral politics and like and working from the inside is completely rotted? Or I mean, like, or like by the same token, like it's so, I mean, we kind of lost, right? We lost that front. Like, is it a matter of like accepting that defeat and then therefore looking elsewhere for like, or not, you know? Or is there like, is it worth like being invested in the remnants that remain there, you know?
Yeah, let me put it this way. I think personally that it is worth it's a test of our mettle and integrity, in the sense where it's like, while we don't have the position of power and while everything is being torn out from under us, are you going to capitulate, right? Like in some ways, I think that like if all these nonprofits, because they're so scared of losing funding and don't change the titles of that thing, there's like a way of like, okay, we're going to find language that skirts around this. I think that's good, right? Because by doing this, you are still being able to fill or meet a need. And like, while it seems like, oh, I capitulate to the system, you're just allowing the same services to run under different titles. You just don't, it's like, this is a moment that one teaches like the well-meaning good people how to be slick and sly instead of wearing
like always
on their
be
chest
completely rules based and like,
yeah,
okay,
exactly. Like,
and like, oh, I reject, like, I'm going to stand up to this on principle, and then like therefore lose any stream of resources you might have actually been able to affect in your NGO position or whatever.
Exactly. Like, if we're going to put it in fighting terms, it's like we're now forced to learn to not telegraph our punches, right? Like everybody knows this is a progressive NGO, but like I'm not going to say the quiet part out loud for you anymore, which is, and then I think on the flip side of this though, yes, I hope that people have learned that there is no true faith in operating from within the system. Like all of these people who are like, I built my career off of this type of justice. Like I'm excited about the prospect of them learning that like, okay, see how quickly this system turned against you. Like everybody's like, it's unprecedented, it's crazy. It's like, no, organizers have been saying this stuff was going to happen. We've been talking about encroaching fascism as if it's like, you know, like it's a reality for a reason. And now that people are sort of faced with a bigger wave of that, the hope is that they are like, oh, now I have to also like, now the work that I thought was easy is actually hard for me to do, right? Like if I'm going to at the Democratic Party, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, you like organizers told you that this was going to happen. Sending Liz Cheney to Dearborn, Michigan was a terrible idea, but you said that wasn't, and that you knew what's best. Everybody's saying, okay, the Democrats haven't learned their lesson, right? Okay, maybe they haven't. maybe they still think that there's some across the aisle reaching. Like I was reading an article the other day where someone was like, hey, like we Democrats are still at the table ready to bargain, but Trump is not bargaining with us. I hope they one day realize that like it never even was a bargain. They don't give a shit about you, and they've never like in good faith wanted to bargain with anything. I think I'm ranting here. The reason I don't think this is particularly generative is because I will just spend the rest of the time bashing how DC bounces back from a thing like this. Like it's striking that a lot of the conversations that I've been having are like, hey, please, I need a job, right? So if it boils down to money being the bottom line, there isn't really a political shift that's happening here, but more so like I want to make, like, these are already people who are on the right side of history and like endeavoring to do these things. And now they're put in the position where, like, if we're going to use the fires example, they're put in the position where they have to either take bum deals or start working along a lot of things. Like one of my friends this weekend was saying that she had posted about how like she'd lost her job and she's really looking for work. And someone who she hasn't spoken to for 13 years or whatever was like, hey, I saw your post. Have you considered Amazon? And she's like, no, but worse, like if she can't find a job, DC being an expensive place, I'm not saying that she's going to do this. Like I would be shocked if she were to work for Amazon, but it's like, this is the the devil coming at your lowest moment, right? Being like, your
like, here's
rent
the bargain.
is, here's your bargain.
Here's the way that, but okay, so like this is kind of what I'm saying is like essentially, it seems like we see these things happening in all different areas, whether it's losing your home or like, and then like not getting paid out by an insurance company, or whether it's like getting arrested for something that shouldn't be, that like getting arrested for like a possession charge or something, and then like your life is ruined, and then there you go, you're disenfranchised, or losing your job because of this like change of administration, where it's like there's no one to save you, and like you're basically in the same, like, I gotta be honest, like I think that like part of me hears these stories and has a sense of like Schadenfreude and a sense of like welcome to the pit with the rest of us, because like I've been working in food service for most of my life, like you could always do that, like you could always wait tables, and it's like, but it's like and it's like what's the real thing that's happening here is that like, oh, you're becoming a worker, and like that's kind of like a part of me is like kind of like brattily saying those things, and then also like and like what that part of the pain of being a like disenfranchised worker is that you have to do a job that you don't agree with, and that's part of the real burden of it, is like you have to do a job that no one is saying to you that is like a good thing to do, whereas like NGO people oftentimes seem to have like a complex where they actually do believe that what they're doing, they almost have an overinflated view of like the worth of what they're doing, when in reality it might just be sending emails and like circulating a system where you're getting grant money to pay yourselves and your employees, and then maybe you send like a fraction of it to another group that then like siphons a portion of that, and the part that they don't siphon then goes to build restrictive housing facilities or whatever that like might not even be the goals, might not even be requested by the people that they're supposedly serving, whatever, right? There's all these different ways that this money gets like circulated and siphoned off into different unintended capillaries. Not to say that there isn't stuff that it's also like doing that's effective and stuff, but it just seems like what I'm really saying is that when you're disenfranchised from a position like that, and the same could be said of Los Angeles people, we're probably going to see a lot of squeezing of all different forms of like cultural creation when it comes to like TV writing, screenwriting, entertainment, etc. Like a lot of this stuff is getting squeezed, and a lot of people who have like found positions in these kind of like coveted roles, so to speak, are getting pushed out. So then it's like, okay, well, you're here with the rest of us. I guess what I'm really trying to say is that at the end of the day, there's kind of this circumstance that everyone has that supposedly happens when things get worse, bad enough, that everyone kind of realizes like, okay, enough is enough, and now it's time to like do radical politics. And then the danger is that it continues to be compromised out. And I guess the question is like, for you listener, for me, for you Josh, like, if I were to lose my job and have to go back to serving food, if I lost my place and everything, how many more of those could I take? You know, like resetting to like just working at fucking food service. And then like, if that's true of me, who's in a pretty good position, relatively speaking, there's got to be a lot of desperate people out there. And the question is like, how, again, you know, how can we connect those? I guess like, when is it time to start trying to build autonomous systems and stuff? And it's always now, but it's always like everyone's too burnt out to do it. I don't know.
Let me give you like a non-autonomous system building example in the NGO space. So there's this organization called State Innovation Exchange. I'm sure you're familiar with them, and a lot of people will be. To maybe give like a brief sort of example. So like the Republicans and the conservatives have this system called ALEC, which basically is like a funneling of policies and things like that. So you can kind of cut and paste conservative policies into other states without necessarily having to do all of this work. It just streamlines their objectives throughout the country. State Innovation Exchange was kind of the progressive version of that, and eventually they get to this point where they realize that part of being a progressive is that you can't do that. Like, you can't really treat everything homogeneously, and even calls in an attempts to try to do that, it doesn't fit the bill for everyone, right? And so when I say that, when is it time to like, when you ask like, when is it time to build this revolutionary system, people try that, and then eventually they realize that in order to create something of the size and magnitude that I need to compete with the system that's crushing me, I begin to take on or adopt their nuances that don't actually benefit people and build community and build the structures that we need to establish. So it's very much how, and maybe to ask another question, maybe the question that I think is responses to that goes in response to this is, how do we build systems that live in these pseudo anarchical spaces without replicating systems of hierarchy that we are embedded with by being or having been a part of this system, right? Like the way that it manifests in DC specifically is there are a lot of people who are like, I want a composting program, I want a community center, I want bike lanes, I also want to make $200,000 a year. Mm-hmm. So you know what I mean? Yeah. So it's like all of those things crush in on each other because there are people who are very dedicated to the first like three or the first things that I said outside of the 200K a year, and they're capped at a certain like living, like standard of living. And as the standard of living keeps like increasing in this city and like the gap begins to broaden, these are people who eventually get pushed out of the city. These are people who then are no longer able to run these systems that we benefit from. So say like someone who picks up the compost around and like actually composts it and puts it in like DC's national parks, or like helps support these food programs. Eventually they won't be able, they don't have the time nor the money to sustain a lifestyle in the city, and then are forced to move to another place as, you know, Mayor Bowser fucking sells another building to a private entity or a corporate developer, right? And so it, maybe that secondary question is like, it's an infrastructure problem, at least in DC, where you can't even get a word in edgewise because everything, at least up to this point, was so focused on a symbol of progressiveness and not necessarily the material conditions that proliferate it or the changes that it requires, right? Like,
it would recover because, like, essentially the only thing that will do it is like a actual, like, a genuinely like socialist platform, like genuinely socialist policies. Like, if we're gonna be within the system, then that's the only thing that'll actually fix these like these escalating crises. And neoliberalism like will not do it. And like, so like, you know, it seems like no matter how you slice it, like we're in the same boat and the same. It's like almost like the only task is to try to build autonomy, because like there is no route I don't see like within the system as it exists. But then by the same token, it's like the people that are the most likely to be on board with those sorts of coalitions are the people that like are struggling to become comfortable in their lives to begin with. Yeah. So it's like, you know, they're also the most likely to take a compromised position, because that takes like an exorbitant amount of their time, because they're just trying to get to a point where they can pay for the grandma's medical bills or whatever, you know?
Yeah.
Or their own insulin.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, I think about, to go back to the DOJ example and all of these lawyers losing their jobs, or at least aspiring lawyers losing clerkships that will get them into high positions of power. To want to be that type of lawyer, there's a specific level of investment in one's expected comforts. As a lawyer, you're expecting to make a certain amount of money, especially if you're at the DOJ doing a specific thing, and you're defending the rule of law in the land, right? And like, we are asking those type A types of people who essentially are rule followers to design systems that are completely outside of the purview of what they expected. The reason why this destruction of the judicial branch, I feel, is so tantamount to the future of how we develop as a country, in terms of like dealing with government and dealing with our laws, and helping them not be, or not continue to like spiral into fascism, is that the people that aspire to obtain powers that have become so warped and so dysfunctional at this stage might not have the bones in their body to like pursue the pro bono work that actually requires them to be a bit more humble, let me say. And I'm not saying that they're all sort of like rampant egotists and things like that, but I am saying that like we are asking them to form a system that they might not have specifically thought about, because their thinking is that they're going to get into the system that exists and change it from within. And to say, hey, here's a third option. You can get you and all of your competitors, right? Being a lawyer is really competitive, right? Instead of competing with each other, you should form a new type of system that uses all of your legal chops and legal expertise. And I'm not talking about the up and coming lawyers now. I'm talking about the people who were in the DOJ, the people who have lost their jobs. You need to you're kicked out now. Your path has become superannuated, right? You've got to now think about a different way to get these new lawyers still excited about the rule of law, having the ability to practice it in a way that actually combats the way that it's been misused and abused. And that requires you to maybe relinquish some of the money, power, and time that is very precious to you. And as you were saying, it's hard for me to imagine a wide enough scope of those types of people to give the leverage and to join ranks with the people that say serve them coffee or pick up their, you know what I mean? Like do all the menial tasks, but are also technically wrapped up in the same political leaning. They just have a different color different color collared job is what I was trying to say.
I think it's easy for people in DC. Again, like this is all perception. I don't really know, but like it seems like it's easy for people in DC to be like talking about a barista or a steel worker or a delivery, like a gig worker, and to say that like, oh, these people are like voting against their own interests, and and like these people need to be mobilizing their workforces and stuff, right? Workplaces and like trying to find and like even. And to see them as like victims of the system and like these people to be defended. But I guess the question is like, do you see hope for getting these people on their way out of the system and being like, hey, here's my socialist card. Like, are you interested? Like, do you think that it's a revelation for a lot of these people to like see themselves as like vulnerable members of society who need to find autonomous systems and or collectives that and like solidarity with like other workers, or and then also beyond that, like another question would be, how do you think it is, what routes are there for building that kind of like collective thinking and that like sense of solidarity among this type of people?
Okay, let me give you my negative Nelly answer first. I think building solidarity with their fellow worker as like a broader, we are all in the capitalist system and subjected to it, that is going to be particularly difficult in a city like DC, because DC is a city that like your hobby, if you want to be successful in the city, your hobby or your secondary job in any role that you're in is networking. So working as a barista, you could come across someone who works at an NGO or works in the government and is looking to hire. And if you happen to be in the right place at the right time, there is a hope. Like people forget sometimes that baristas and other workers in this city are rubbing shoulders with politicians and their aides at all times, and maybe applying to switch positions. Sorry, go ahead.
No, like is that kind of like LA, where people move to LA to be like, okay, I'm gonna like be a barista, be a waiter, be a bartender, but like I'm taking acting classes, and like, you know, this producer who worked on Transformers is a regular here, so maybe at one point I get to know him and that'll be my way in. Like, is that kind of like the ethos for a lot of people that move to DC?
I maybe not the ethos for a lot of people that move here, but I will tell you that especially in like the youth culture, like people in their 20s living in this city, if they're moving because of just one, how shittily some of these jobs pay, like on the Hill, being a Hill staffer, like a young Hill staffer, it pays piss to be on the like a lot of people who want those roles have to have external streams of income or multiple jobs or work weekends, right, in order to stay within the system, right? So I'm a barista on my weekends, but that's because I work on the Hill all other times.
So they're already in it as a career, but the barista position would potentially help them network within it.
Exactly. And like, I think an additional factor is like, there are people who maybe between industries or between jobs, they go to those systems. They'll like, I'm going to work at this bar for X amount of years just until I can get my footing, or like, I'm applying to these jobs, and as I'm between jobs, I'm going to be working. So Gotcha. To answer your question, yes and no. Like it's a mixed bag. Not yes and no. It is, the answer to your question is yes, and it works a little differently than that, because it's like, while you are networking, you're also you're trying to sustain yourself, and you would hope. And my negative Nelly answer is like, you would hope that would get people to be like, okay, this system fundamentally needs to change, like improving the minimum wage, for example. But the reason why that was particularly difficult in this city is that a lot of the wealthier people are like, this is going to disincentivize tipping culture or some shit like that. Right. And so as response, like, you know, restaurants and bars have been like, 20% has already been added, which we can talk about that later. Right.
So it sounds like there actually is a lot of like built-in solidarity between like Hill staffers and, you know, like whatever else, like any other hourly position.
But the problem is there's a disdain for that type of work.
I see.
You think of it as temporary, and there's a lot of people who who are like,
I mean, the question would be then, like, what is the motivation to even work on the Hill, right? Like, because like, do you really, because how, it's like kind of hard for me to comprehend like a 20-year-old believing, I guess maybe a 20-year-old, but like a 28-year-old believing that they could actually do anything there. Like, so then what is it? Like, is it prestige? Like, I mean, a lot of people probably do genuinely believe, right?
It is prestige, but I also think that I can equate it, or at least it feels like, as someone who, to clarify, listeners and everyone, I never worked on the Hill, but I have a lot of friends who worked on the Hill or whatever. And I think there is a sense similar to frat culture where it's like, if you eat enough shit, you then get into a position where you might have to eat a bigger bowl of shit, but at least your salary is increased and you have prestige and status.
So there's a high... So like... So it's aspirational, essentially. Because like you can actually get... Yeah, I mean, obviously you can get like all sorts of great privileges if you get the right 100%. Positions. Okay, gotcha.
Like, it's
like... It's just like fucking Hollywood, I swear to God. Because it's like what's even so good about writing a script for... Like, writing for a living? Because like... You know, what's so good about that? And it's like, you know, it's not like a horrible way to make a living or anything, but like the amount of shit you have to go through to do that is crazy. And like it's like paying a bunch of money every year to buy lottery tickets, you know? It's like, yeah,
the frat culture, right?
Yeah, right.
You pay in, and now you're a part of the society of people. You're the lowest rank, and now every year you're trying to weasel your way up to being, you know, the treasurer of fun or whatever, right? And like, here, perks include security clearance, but you know what that security clearance comes with? All of your personal information is gone to the US government. Now, like, in my mind, now you have to be extra careful about anything you do. So when it comes to being scrappier, you've got a tether right to the back of your neck. Like, you took that red pill, and you were like, I need this matrix to run and run well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the it's like when facing these disasters, like it seems like that is the challenge of our time, is to be like, I mean, the challenge and opportunity of our time is like, this is a potential for recruiting people for radical politics in all the different ways that we see things fall out and fall apart.
Do you remember a few episodes back when I was like, when the Biden shit was happening, Biden's president, and they're trying to hide from everyone that Biden is falling apart at the seams. Like, instead of letting this man run again, instead of wasting all of America's time, if everyone like that was 24 and under decided that we refuse to work under these conditions, like, it would halt the system and things would have to change. But because it's so competitive, like, 7 people do that, and then the rest of them are like, thank God, now I can take their role, or now I have more job, et cetera, et cetera. So it pays. These are rule followers, right? And I think it's going to be hard to convince a rule follower that, hey, the rules that you've been abiding by are actually the tools of your own destruction, when they see you as someone who, one, can't follow the rules, or two, does not gain the benefits of following the rules as they do. It's the same thing with like racism in general. Like, if someone's like, hey, as a white person, can you please just like fight against anti-blackness together, because if you help the least of us, you're helping everyone. And then they're like, why would I do that when, like, the DEI stuff, why would I defend DEI anything when I, as a, you know, cis het white whatever, like, benefit greatly from just like, or nothing changes for me fundamentally by living in this system. In fact,
like,
it's
you're
harder
sticking
for
your
me
neck out for
worse.
potentially having a negative, like maybe a slightly less possible, you know, maybe slightly less possibility for upward like advancement. Like it's not in. Well, but I mean, like ultimately it is in your interest, but you're just like, you're lured by. That's what it's the same thing with L. It's the same thing with LA. Like this idea of like LA invading your dreams. You know. It's like, I think that like but I mean, that is the condition under which we all basically all live like in America, because it's like essentially working at all is kind of like against your interest, like, you know, like, because you are paying taxes to this thing. And so like, and then like you're selling your time at a definitionally unequal exchange. So like you are selling yourself short, and that's like the majority of your life. And so like to even buy into the system to begin with is kind of against your interests. But it's like we all do it because it's like, I mean, I think it's because we don't have a alternative articulated sexually enough. And then also like it's maybe not like grounded, but like I think that's, you know, I think I just am saying that I feel like there's like potentials here. Like this is like we're basically on the accelerationist train, whether we like it or not. And like essentially right now, like basically our only option is to like operate under accelerationist like kind of like concepts. But my thing is like we got to get serious about getting on board for like what to do when it derails, when the train derails. When Walter Benjamin or whatever says that we have to like derail the train of history. So that we can like, that's what revolution is. It's like putting the emergency brakes on the train of history. So like we are getting opportunities because we're like facing like a like techno-feudalist takeover that like essentially is gutting everything, and through a mixture of incompetence and intention, just gonna like grind everything to various sorts of collapses. Like this is a moment where the train is kind of derailing. So like, you know, now's the part where we are supposed to be like, here's an alternative to like the techno-feudalism.
Yep. And to sprinkle some hope, I guess, against that, like, you know, the like concepts that I had raised before, the ways in which the inside outside approach has been framed is that some people are on the inside, some people are on the outside. They can work in tandem in order to create change, right? Now that people on the inside are brought to the outside, there's a hope that now they have to heed the wisdom of the outside. Like it's like everybody's home is destroyed, people are dispossessed, and now they've joined maroon communities. And in these maroon communities that welcome, they're like, hey, like, I keep seeing this clip from some show that I don't even know the name of, where this person's like, I cleaned toilets on the yacht, but now that we're stranded here, like I'm the captain. And so it's like, all right, if they can switch that framing and just be like, I can be a rule follower enough to say like, hey, like, I think you're right about this, where can I plug in? Then we have more synergy. We have it becomes less of this brain drain towards the system, and now we have more fuel to generate like new ideas and how to, because they have the know-how of how the system works. And if the people on the inside now on the outside are like, oh, here's a great way we can stop this, like, you know, in the same way that people flood the you know, the snitching, like, oh, this is a DEI thing, like they send emails in and saying the DEI blah 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 blah, and they just waste people's time. It's like, oh yeah, we can do this, and then we can do this to actually halt the thing, or here's the most annoying thing about my job, and then those two people can collaborate. We can create something new. And I think the real the big thing that we just got to worry about is money all the time. Like there's a corporate entity that techno-feudalism encroaches when it gives you that enticing, like, here's an easy way to make bank, which means here's an easy way to have a home. Here's an easy way to do X, Y, and Z. You just have to fall into a certain level of line or a certain level of acceptance of the status quo. And I think that the people who have been burned, not to be flippant about what that could imply, but people who have been subjugated to these big firings may not have the same like hunger to like capitulate again. You know what I mean? Like they're like, oh, if I'm on this razor's edge as much as everybody else is, then maybe I should band together with these other people and, you know, form a platform that they have to contend with. Because you know, if we're going to go back to like the preaching democracy, it is about people. And when you realize that numbers matter, and by being a part of a collective, you can go places. I think it's going to be slower than we need it to be, though. So I do hear your like thirst as well for something that's more rapid and responsive to like that emergency brake. That's a thing we need to pull now and fast, not something that we can like slowly put logs in the middle of the train hoping that they're gonna slow down its speed, you know?
Well, it's like, to put it like, it's almost like, you know, it's the end of Snowpiercer. Like essentially we are like things have escalated to the point where like it's going to it is, I mean, it's crashing currently, you know, it's crashing. So yeah, we're here, you know what I mean? So like, but it's funny because like using that logic, like it's almost like we could all ironically kind of almost learn from like people who have successfully been able to survive homelessness, you know, throughout the country, or like built like homeless encampments and stuff. It's almost like those, like, you know, like in vastly compromised positions. Because like there's the common knowledge that like we're all like 2 paychecks away from being homeless, right? And it's like that is like one of the major bludgeons that like that's one of the major fears against which we create our dreams of our lives, and therefore condition our daily operations. And then like, but then also with that would also be like, that would also mean finding instances of people who have held like renter strikes and stuff. And people, but and then from there, it's also like, okay, it's time to start looking at like, you know, like again, like the Zapatistas or whatever other, like George Floyd Square existed for a couple of years. Like, there have been autonomous zones that have held their own for like an amount of time. So it might be time to like start looking into those things again, because it's like, even if it's like you've got a condo on in a complex, that could be a start. And like, you know, so, and then like by extension, if you have like 5 lawyers who are all have the same mindset and when we're fired, that could be a start, you know? So it's like, the way I see it, it's like we got to prepare for like autonomy, and then like and then like in the same, and then like if there is any hope and then like expect nothing short of like socialism if we're going to be doing if we're going to be like excited about electoral anything.
Yeah.
Like ideally, I kind of feel like ideally we'd have like a society that like serves everyone, but like it just seems basically impossible for that to happen, and therefore we have to like look at autonomous spaces and look at how they've been defended, resourced, and started in the past, which they have.
Yeah, I think we need to do that, and I think maybe just to add like another plug, and maybe this is just my own politicking on this, but I think they're doing the autonomous zones in small ways that expand secretively over time is going to like be really, really helpful in terms of like, I'm thinking about the underground economy. I'm again, going back to Fred Moten and the undercommons.
We should do a freaking episode on it.
We should do an episode on it because it's like there is a way that the mutual debt that we all have to each other that is kind of the foundation of society in a much older way, in terms of like ancient way, that this is how communities form, that we are beholden to one another, are ways in which we can like silently subvert a system that is designed to exploit people, when the reality is, if we're just saying like we're all exploited and I'll cover you if you cover me, and you know, Wu-Tang Clan, I got your back but you best to watch the front, you know what I mean, that sort of thing. And like you don't have as much fear of loss that I think the threats from the government or large powers you know, cast against you, and maybe dispelling that fear means a quieter building of these autonomous systems and communities where it's like little things go a long way, and then eventually you're living in a society where when we talk about knowing your neighbors, you actually do have a relationship with the homeless person who is on your block, and like you're able to like, even though he may not be able to pay rent, a corner of the apartment complex is where his tent is, and you know, we make sure that he has enough resources to survive because he's a part of our community, and we don't give a shit what like, you know, X, Y, and Z person says about this, because we don't tell them that he's there. In fact, because he's mobile, we just give him awareness and to let him protect his own things through the resources and information that we can share with him. Right.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's like, you know, the being homeless is like the ultimate fear that people have when they're like shackled to things that they don't want to do, that they do on a daily basis. Whether it's moral or because it feels bad in the moment. But like, I'm actually kind of genuinely a little bit like, don't get me wrong, like homeless people in Minnesota getting their fingers frozen off every season and stuff. But like, I'm actually kind of genuine about like, what if we kind of started looking at like successful homeless people and you know, and started seeing like this actually isn't the end of the world. You still have a life. You actually still have a life and community and stuff. So like, what if we did that as a part of the, and then if that's the case, then that means that like worst case scenario, you're doing that. But I mean, it is pretty, I mean, like, I don't want to belittle the struggles, but it's also, I mean, it's a genuine trade-off that people make. And it's like, I think that I'm coming around a little bit to being like, whether you're forced into it or not, like that might not be, I mean, it kind of is like I don't know. It just is like learning how to navigate homelessness is like probably an essential skill that would help build solidarity, not only because you could then more effectively resource homeless people for like what they actually need and stuff, but then also it's like, it's skills that we should all be building. Because it's part of autonomy would be being able to be nomadic and mobile.
Not only is that very, very true, but that's almost like seemingly a red-pilled thing to say, because these doomsday preppers who are, you know, on the conservative side of things, who are like, hey, like I know how to survive, like these sort of like hyper masculine survival what are they called? I don't know, just journeymen,
survivalists or whatever.
Survivalists, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They're like, I have these skills, and those skills are important. Now, I know that we're sort of talking about a more urban context, and they might be talking about a more rural context, but I think
but like, where is the rural context? And like, there are homeless people who live in the woods, so like,
yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. Where it's like, no, they're
like they've been doing it for years. It's like they've been doing what the survivalist people are like gearing up to do. And it's like, just because you have a bag of like nice items doesn't mean that you know how to do it. And just because you like read a bunch of books about it doesn't mean you know how to do it. Just because you did like a class where like you go out into the woods and try to see how long you can survive, you last 3 days, and you like outlast the rest of your classmates. You lasted 3 days on your own in the wild. Like, there's people who have been doing it there for a long time, for years. So like, you know, and it's you know, through different codependencies and networks and stuff that they figure out. But it's like, yeah, maybe turning the lens onto these people and being like, okay, like, let's talk. I mean, you know, you don't want to blow up their spots, right? But like,
of course,
it's also like putting the lens on these people might be, and this is something I've really done that much in the recent years, but like that might be a way to like just reorient the whole fucking thing and just be like, it's not just because these people are vulnerable, but it's also because they have like a lot to offer the rest of us. Yeah. Not to like make a monolith of anything, because like, again, like, just because you're homeless doesn't mean that you know what you're doing or whatever, you know. But
but also, for someone to discover a technique, you know, is also valid, you know?
Right.
Even if they don't post on Reddit about it, you know? Yeah.
Well, conclusion. So like, what has this conversation even been? How did we get from there to here?
I mean,
it makes actually pretty much sense, right?
I mean, yeah. I mean, we talked about, I think, maybe to put a bow on some things, by talking about the way that DC is suffering from a history of investment in systems that have been breaking down for some time. And now that we're reaching a point where systems are being fundamentally broken and maybe even more difficult to repair, we're encouraging people to move in new ways and also establish new systems to, and as we said in the last episode, not fall into that nostalgia trap, not let the dream of LA and let the dream of DC today really captivate you to a point where you are maybe paralyzed against the doom and the ruptures that are to come. And so with this DOJ stuff, it's like, I just hope that the lawyers that are now fired are able to recalibrate, reassess, and reapply some of their skills in new and innovative ways that combats this system and maybe helps design that emergency brake on this train of destruction that we're on. And so, yeah, when we say look to these autonomous living situations, like, you can even take some of these techniques that, like, if you're talking to the homeless person who lives in the woods, apply them abstractly to the abstraction that is your work, that is paperwork, and be like, how do I replicate this thing in my white collar position, right? Because that's the type of scrappiness we're talking about. And yes, like, you know, it does take some creative thinking, but that level of creativity is necessary for survival, especially when we're not being destroyed by innovative types of like societal collapse. This is shit we've seen before and has been telegraphed and people have been talking about. It's just now real because you lost your job. It's just now real because like we have like an autocrat in the making, right? And so there is that. Sorry, Anyway, I'm gonna get off my throne. But
no, man, we just got to develop like the muscle of collective thinking, like genuinely, and collective sentiment, which isn't just a word or a thing. It's like something you can do, but like, you got to like tap into it, you know. And that once you do, it's like, like nothing is nothing is off limit. Like nothing's off limits for you to empathize with, and also, hopefully, if you're pitying somebody, as opposed to both having sympathy for them and being open-minded about what they know that you don't, then you're not doing the collective thinking. You're still just like being, you're limited, right? You're being limited in your capacity to think collectively. So, I think that's like a really essential. It's like a skill that is the only thing that'll benefit us as
Absolutely.
Otherwise, you're just rolling the dice, and one of these days you're not gonna pass the check. So you'll just be on your own, and then you'll be fucked.
Exactly.
So yeah,
you'll be fucked. Yeah, exactly. And I even want to be like, if you lean in towards pity, and in a world where we can't rely on empathy, turn that pity to at least curiosity. You know what I mean? Like
how do these people? Like this person's been alive for like 50 years on the street. So like, how has he done it? Yeah.
Exactly, Doug. So
yeah.
Anyway, this does make interesting conversation. Yeah. Maybe more to come.
Yeah.
But thanks. This is fun. Like, thank you everyone for listening. Thank you, Jackie, for another great conversation. And I'm really looking forward to like teasing out some of these thoughts and ideas on autonomy and how to take advantage of this moment, especially how sort of precarious and rapidly things are precarious it is, and how rapidly things are changing. And so, signing off. And yeah, we're going to try something new. I'm going to read just a part of the manifesto. So the part that I think is most relevant goes like this. Note when you're stuck, put sugar on your tradition pills, and record before flight. Your wax wings are warmer than you think. When you plummet and hit the mud, how does that feel to rot with glee, to decay with me? Like the process of radioactive decay in unstable atoms, degeneration yields a more sustainable future. Thank you all.